Everybody can take one.
Uniform back. Yeah, sort of. And then we had to eat all the oh yeah.
Well, hello, and as we say in my church this time of year, Christ is risen, and the response, He is risen. Very good. We're taught. You're coached. Yeah, this is the season this week we've come through on my church. We call it, it's a very theological body time. We call it, in fact, the week of the bridegroom. And all the imagery, that's where you get to the sum total of what John Paul II said in part of the Theology of the Body, that the language of liturgy is conjugal, and conjugal relations are liturgical. Because in fact that's what happens during this week. It's the union of the wedding, it's the wedding feast of the bridegroom with his bride. Christ comes, prepares himself to unite with his bride. And as we say on Easter Sunday, in my church, he emerges from the tomb like a bridegroom from the bridal chamber and fills the women with joy. So it's the quintessential theology of the body, feast of the church. And the fathers of the church knew, that's why John Paul II drew upon them, the fathers and the mystics knew that this spousal mystery was the fundamental element of human existence, and it was fundamental to our faith, and so they wove it right into this great week and this greatest of feast days. The key for today is going to be this phrase, reread in truth. That's John Paul's word. You'll see that, reread, to reread the language of the body in truth. And my word for it is honesty. You know, of course, truth, honesty, very similar. Right? So I call it stepping into the H zone. That's going to be the key to understanding this section now, this culminating section of his theology of the body, the sort of the real, if you want to pinpoint, the pinpoint why behind his whole catechesis was to provide this explanation of the why behind Humanae Vitae, the church's teaching on contraception. Because as you'll see, as he says, all the questions that are addressed in the theology of the body spring out of this question of contraception, and the church's teaching on that. And what he was doing was he was answering the question, basically the challenge, as it were, that was presented in Humanae Vitae by Paul VI, when he said that in order to understand Humanae Vitae, the world would have to have an adequate vision of the human person. And that vision of the human person is what John Paul II attempted to present to the world. Because unless you have that, then the church's teaching in Humanae Vitae doesn't make sense. That's why it didn't make sense to most people, most of the world, and in fact to people who it should have made sense to, like theologians, believe it or not, bishops, priests, to many of them. Not all, but to many. And what was missing was a sufficient enough Catholic worldview, sacramental worldview. and therefore the view of the human person, because that is what enables you to understand then the whole of this teaching. So as we do in this class, is we go through the text, we actually look at the text, certain key texts, and so we're going to start today on, in your books, it would be on page 617, which is chapter 3. It says, he gave them the law of life as their inheritance. The ethical problem, the moral norm, the truth of the language of the body. In the first paragraph I want to look at, it'll be on the next page, 618, number 4. In the reflections about the sacramental sign, we already said several times that this sign is based on the language of the body reread in the truth. So here's that phrase, reread in the truth. The truth at stake here is affirmed for the first time at the beginning of marriage, when the new spouses, by promising to be faithful to each other always and to love each other, love and honor each other, all the days of their lives, become ministers of marriage as a sacrament of the church. Okay, so let's skip over to number 5 on the next page. By its intimate structure, the conjugal act, while most closely uniting husband and wife, capacitates them for their generation of new lives, according to laws inscribed in the very being of man and of woman. Okay, now what he's saying here is that when we read, this is the key, that when we read the theology of the body, we decode the theology of the body, what the laws that govern, in a sense, if we're going to speak in those terms, the laws that govern the church's teaching are inscribed in the language of the body as a male and female. In other words, this teaching, yes, of course it is based on Scripture like anything else the church does. It's not explicit in Scripture, but it's actually, in a sense, the whole of Scripture. I mean, you glean it from the whole of Scripture. And it's based on reason and the magisterium, the church's reflection upon the Scripture, and also simply on the language, the theology of the body. See, the key thing is this, and this is the difference between us and the world. When I say world, unfortunately I have to say that it's the world as, unfortunately, as most of us are even formed by it. It's this. You start out, the right way to start out, which is what he's saying here, is you start out by observing the created order. How are things made? How does it work? What is it? Learn what it is first. Decode it. By, as he says, our subjective experience, our intellectual interaction with it, our contemplation, our observance, our experience. You come to learn and to see what the natural order, the created order is. That's the start. That, in other words, it came first. God, the first thing they did was made order out of chaos, right? Okay, so he made an order of things. Things work a certain way. And everything created speaks of God. It points to this order. It points to a God. Our job then is to look at those things and read that language. Then proceed with it.
Can that be called the natural law?
Exactly. It's the natural law. Another word is the created order. The natural law is like our intellectual, it's our intelligent interaction with the created order. In other words, it's our way to observe it. We can therefore deduce this, and this. It's like if we keep doing this and to get the same result, we can conclude that gravity pulls things down, right? We didn't make this up because it's a policy of the government. No, it's a program, it's a philosophy. We conclude objectively that whatever goes up must come down, because that is the sum total of our experience of it. Okay, so now we have to conclude, and now we have to work according to that. which means we can't just jump off bridges. We have to, if we want to fly, we have to observe the principles of gravity and of air and wind and all that. So we start from the natural law, the created order, revealing itself to us, our intellectual interaction with it, and then it's a matter of reading it in truth and then being honest to it. That's the simple that's the underlying, that's the thread that's going to be woven through all this. The reason why these things get confused, church is teaching on this, and people don't accept it or they resist it, is because they don't start from observing the natural order. They start from an ideology or a desire, and then they want to put the natural order into that. In other words, make or pretend that you can bend the natural order to comply with our ideology. So in other words, we become the starting point instead of the natural order. That's the difference. And this is so foundational, so important, that this is exactly what's happened in the so-called bad economy. We started from a position of this is what we want and this is what we're going to get, totally ignoring that there is an order to economics. If you follow that order, you'll have a good economy. But if you ignore that and you approach the economy from your ideology, from your desires, you will eventually get burnt. And that's all that's happening now. We're just being burnt because we did not approach things like Catholics. Which is why until the whole world becomes completely faithfully Catholic, we'll still have trouble. Because this is the Catholic worldview. It starts from, the starting point is God and His created order. We learn what it is and interface with it. Okay, so that's what he's saying here. All right, let's go down the bottom of 619. In this way, the innermost structure or nature of the conjugal act constitutes the necessary basis for an adequate reading and discovery of the meanings that must be carried over into the conscience and the decisions of the acting persons. It also constitutes the necessary basis for grasping the adequate relationships of these meanings, namely their inseparability. Since the conjugal act at one and the same time deeply unites husband and wife and together makes them able to generate new lives, and since the one as well as the other thing comes about by its innermost structure, it follows, with the necessity proper to reason, logical necessity, that the human person should read at one and the same time the two meanings of the conjugal act, and also the inseparable connection between the two meanings of the conjugal act. Nothing else is at stake here than reading the language of the body in the truth. As has been said several times in the earlier biblical analysis, the moral norm constantly taught by the Church in this sphere, recalled and reconfirmed by Paul VI in his encyclical, springs from reading the language of the body in the truth. What is at stake here is the truth, first in the ontological dimension, innermost structure, and then as a consequence in the subjective and psychological dimension, in other words, the meaning. The text of the encyclical underlines that in this case we are dealing with the norm of the natural law. I don't think men are allowed here tonight. You're supposed to stay online. So, welcome anyway. Basically, he's saying that the innermost structure, if you, you can get, if you want to, if you can get, depending on the audience, you can get very, if you really want, the best thing to do is get very, very graphic and very, very detailed. What happens during sexual intercourse? I mean, in the greatest detail, what happens? And what always happens? Well, if this is what always happens, all those details, that's the innermost structure. And what he's saying then is that, well, then, if that's an unchangeable thing, then the meaning of that can't be separated out of it because it's like carried with it. In other words, the unitive and procreative, the two dimensions, that it brings two people together as one, a union and communion of persons, and it has the potential for life, that those things can never be separated. Because that's exactly what happens during the act. That's what the act is saying. And see, what we try to do is pretend that they can be separated, or artificially try to separate them. And this is where all the problems come in. So you see, it's actually very simple. You know, what happens, you know, again, it's like, what happens when I do this? If I lift something, let it go, it always is pulled downward. Now, if I try to pretend it doesn't happen, there's going to be unfortunate consequences, right? Okay, it's the same thing with the one flesh union. So what is at stake here, it says, is the truth and the meaning of this action. Okay, let's go to 621. Number 3, page 621. Humanae Vitae thus contains the norm and its reason, or at least a deeper understanding of what constitutes the reason of the norm. Since in addition, the moral values expressed in the norm in a binding way, acts that conform to the norm are thus morally right, which, while acts contrary to it, are intrinsically illicit. The author of the encyclical underlines that this norm is part of the natural law, like you're saying, sister. That is, that it conforms to reason as such. The Church teaches this norm, even though it is not formally, that is literally, expressed in sacred Scripture. And she does so in the conviction that the interpretation of the precepts of the natural law belong to the competence of the magisterium. Okay, so it's just the Church observing. Remember, the Church is the press secretary for God. That's all we are. We're the press secretary for God. We simply come before the world and say, this is what God says. This is what God did. See, there are no, in a sense, in one way you can say there's no teachings of the Church. You know, there's nothing that's original with us. Like we're this club, because it makes us, you know, people look at the Church like we're this club that makes up these things and wants to impose them on everybody, you know, that's so out of date, you know. And it's not that at all. We're not a club. We're not even a religion. We're simply the mouthpiece for God that just says, look, this is what God did. That's all. This is what God did. Now, if you do what he did, if you go with it, you'll be okay. If not, there's going to be trouble. That's all. That's it. That's all we say. We make nothing up. There are no teachings that are original to the Church. The Church is this press secretary for God. Okay. Where were we? Okay. Okay, 622. Paul VI, this first paragraph there, 622. Paul VI writes, we believe the human beings of our day are particularly capable of seeing the deeply reasonable and human character of this fundamental principle. Well, I think he's being too kind. One can add that they are also able to grasp its deep conformity with all that is transmitted by the tradition flowing from the biblical sources. The basis of this conformity should be sought particularly in biblical anthropology. We know that what importance anthropology has for ethics, that is, for moral teaching. It seems to be entirely reasonable to look in the theology of the body for the foundation of the truth and the norms concerning such a fundamental issue of man as body. The two will be one flesh. The norm of Humanae Vitae concerns all men and women inasmuch as it is a norm of the natural law and is based on conformity with human reason, evidently when reason is seeking the truth. It concerns even more all the believing members of the Church, given that the reasonable character of this norm finds an indirect confirmation and solid support in the whole of the theology of the body. From this point of view, we spoke in our earlier analysis about the ethos or the redemption of the body. And so in other words, Humanae Vitae, again, it's not this, here's this teaching from this celibate pope in Rome. What does he know? It's going to impose, he can stand out of our bedroom. No, he's simply dipping into what is the ethos of the redemption of the body, something that already is a fact by Jesus Christ's incarnation, death, and resurrection. He's dipping into that and coming to this observation of the meaning of this action of the male and female body in the marital act. Okay, you understand? Based on this ethos, the norm of the natural law finds not only a new expression, but also a full anthropological and ethical foundation in the word of the gospel, as well as in the purifying and strengthening action of the Holy Spirit. These are all good reasons why every believer, and in particular every theologian, should reread and understand even more deeply the moral teaching of the encyclical in this integral context. You see that? Theologians especially. Reread it. See, what happened was, you had generations of priests, including myself, who were not taught this, believe it or not. What we were taught is, oh, the church will realize that it was wrong on this and it's going to change, so don't really bother getting into it too deeply. Imagine that. Now they sent us priests with that idea into confessionals and into counseling situations. And look what we did to these poor people. So, yes, theologians should reread it. Okay, 623, the bottom, last paragraph. One could dwell for a long time on the analysis of the norm itself, but the character of both documents leads rather, he's talking about Gaudium et Spes and also Humanae Vitae, but both documents leads rather to reflections that are at least indirectly pastoral. In fact, Gaudium et Spes is a pastoral constitution, and Paul VI encyclical, with all its doctrinal value, tends to have the same orientation. It is intended, in fact, to be a response to the questions of contemporary men and women. See, Humanae Vitae was seen as this imposition on these poor couples to have all these children. Actually, it was a response to the pastoral need to give them guidance in this area of what to do or not to do. So it was doctrinal and pastoral. There are questions of a demographic and consequently socioeconomic and political nature in relation to population growth throughout the world. These are questions that come from the field of particular sciences, and hand in hand with them questions of contemporary moralists. They are above all questions of spouses who already stand at the center of the attention of the conciliar constitution, which the encyclical takes up again with all desirable precision. Okay, in other words, he's saying, we know there are all kinds of factors. There are economic factors. There are social factors, social pressures. And women went into the workplace. Both parents are working. Things are expensive. How can you afford? Kids are expensive. He's saying we know these things. And that's precisely why we try to give this guidance, this document, to help guide you amidst that. Number 4, on page 624. In the formulation above, it is evident that with what concern the author of the encyclical tries to face the questions of contemporary man in all their weightiness. The importance of these questions calls for proportionally weighed and deep answer. You see? Not a soundbite. A weighed and deep answer. If, therefore, it is right on the one hand to expect a penetrating treatment of the norm, one can also expect that no less weight be given to pastoral arguments concerning more directly the life of concrete human beings, are precisely those who raise the questions mentioned at the beginning. Paul VI always had these persons before his eyes. The following passage, among others, is an expression of this concern. Quote, the teaching of the church on the regulation of birth, which promulgates the divine law, will easily appear to many to be difficult or even impossible to observe. See, you never heard that, did you? Just like, he imposed this on it. And indeed, like all great beneficent realities, it demands serious engagement and much effort, individually, family, and social effort. More than that, it would be impossible to observe without the help of God, who upholds and strengthens the goodwill of men. Yet to anyone who reflects well, it cannot but be clear that such efforts ennoble man and are beneficial to the human community. Now there's a departure point between the church and the world. He's saying, basically, and we'll see it more as we go along, I know this is difficult. I know this is challenging. But with the help of God, you can do it, and in the process, you will become a better person, and so will the world. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because there may be some pain involved, he's going to introduce the word ascesis, which we just came through Lent, but now it's Easter. Just because it involves that, as do all worthy things, doesn't mean it's wrong, or you should throw it out. When something is difficult or challenging, you rely on God. Bottom of the page, we'll start there on 624. One could add a consideration here. The fact that the whole biblical background called theology of the body, offers us, even if indirectly, the confirmation of the truth of the moral norm contained in Humanae Vitae, and prepares us to consider the practical and pastoral aspects of the problem as a whole at greater depth. Did we not draw all the principles and general presuppositions of the theology of the body from the answers Christ gave to the questions of his concrete interlocutors? Are Paul's texts, such as 1 Corinthians, not a little manual about the problems in the moral life of the first followers of Christ? And in these texts, we certainly find the rule of understanding present in Humanae Vitae that seems so indispensable in the face of the problems treated in this encyclical. In other words, we went to the words of Christ. We went to St. Paul as he's addressing pastoral problems in Corinthians. He's trying to say this is very pastoral. It's very sensitive in understanding. Those who believe that the counsel in the encyclical do not sufficiently take into account the difficulties of concrete life do not understand the pastoral concern that stood at the origin of these documents. Pastoral concern means seeking the true good of man. Very important distinction. The true good, not just the good of man, not what makes people feel good, the true good of man. Promoting the values impressed by God in the human person, that is, it signifies applying the rule of understanding, which aims at the ever clearer discovery of God's plan for human love, in the certainty that the one and only true good in the human person consists in putting this divine plan into practice. Another word translated, the best thing for all of us is to do it God's way. But it's hard. I know it's hard. Do it God's way, with God's help. Yes?
Father, I got some conversations online. One woman who's a convert to the faith through Theology of the Body just commented, I call this part of the theology, quote, standing on a high dive, getting ready for the jump. This is where I threw out my birth control. Another person comments on that, NFP is awesome. Another one, trusting in God, yes, exclamation point. And someone else is speaking about the practical benefits of NFP in the life of the couple. So, we've got just a lot coming off of what you've been saying.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Yes, it is. It is means taking that jump, and it changes your life once you do it. And we're going to get into scientific proof. That's really all we really believe in. None of this hocus pocus stuff from a bunch of celibates in Rome. Science. All right, we'll go to science, and we'll prove it. Okay. Now, let's go to, let me see here. Okay, I think we'll do it. All right. let's go to 620. He's going to talk about responsible parent, get into responsible parent, what we mean by that. Page 626, number 2. Before this passage, the council teaches, thus they will fulfill their task with human and Christian responsibility and with docile reverence towards God. This means that they will make decisions by common counsel and effort. Let them thoughtfully take into account both their own welfare and that of their children, those already born and those which the future may bring. For this accounting, they need to reckon with both the material and the spiritual conditions of the times, as well as of their state in life. Finally, they should consult the interests of the family group, of temporal society, and of the church herself. Now, you notice that? How many things that they're telling us to take into consideration? Everything. Not just, here's the church's teaching, and I don't care what the circumstances are, you better follow it, you're going to go to hell. No, they're saying we take it all into consideration. Not just the church, but everything. The demographics, society, the concerns of the family, everything. Okay, page 627. Number 5. One can speak about responsibility in the exercise of fatherhood and motherhood under various aspects. Thus, he writes, in relationship to biological processes, responsible parenthood means the knowledge of and reverence for their functions. The human intellect discovers in the power of giving life biological laws, which are part of the human person. When the psychological dimension is at issue and the tendencies of instinct or passion, responsible parenthood means that necessary dominion which reason and will must exercise over them. Taking the above-mentioned aspects within the person as given and adding economic and social conditions, one must recognize that responsible parenthood is exercised either by the prudent and generous decision to raise a numerous family, or by the decision made for serious reasons and with due respect for the moral law to avoid for the time being, or even for an indeterminate period, a new birth. Are you familiar with the Alexander house, the Alexander couple? I don't know if you saw they're on their email list or whatever. They're a couple that speaks about marriage. So they were one of those that converted. They were into the contraception and everything, and their marriage started falling apart. Then they had a conversion, and now they're good, and they have they give talks. And they started this whole ministry called Alexander House. Anyway, they've had several children, and recently the wife, after her pregnancy, got deathly ill. Very, very, very ill. And now the doctors say that she absolutely cannot get pregnant again. And they said, they put it on the internet, that they explained the whole thing, and they said that, but they will not get pregnant again. At least they will try not to, but through natural family planning. They're still going to do it God's way. And they said, this will just, give us further ennoble, the word he used here, ennoble the witness value of what we talk about, of what we present. To the world, that would be unthinkable. But with God, all things are possible. Okay. You see, on 628, number 6, the top, the couple observe in this area their own duties towards God, towards themselves, towards the family, and towards society in a correct hierarchy of values. See, notice that? God, the couple, the family, society. It's a hierarchy. What comes first? Right. Okay. Now in 629, this, yes.
Well, can I ask one question about the scenario that you mentioned?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this is one objection that I used to have. I mean, I'm a convert who who accepts the church's teaching on this issue as true, even though I don't always understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And one objection that I used to have was, so in that situation, they're not using contraception because they're saying we're just going to leave this up to the will of God.
Mm-hmm.
In other situations, say you get sick and you take a medicine that changes the way that changes sort of the course that your body would take.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes it takes what would be one process, the course of some illness or some virus or something, and changes that. So one way that I used to think was using contraception is like taking, I mean, it sounds weird, but like taking medicine to prevent something else from happening.
Right.
How would you respond to that objection?
I think one of the key words is order. What belongs to the order of something? Disease, believe it or not, does not belong to the order of health of our body. Disease is a foreign object. And so what you're trying to do in curing a disease, you're taking what is necessary for that to cure. Your goal is to cure the disease. Okay. You're not really doing anything that's intrinsic to the order of health. See, what would be wrong is if you took poison, purposely took poison. That would be then contrary to the order of health. The order of health means towards life and living. Poison would be towards death. Okay, the medicine is trying to enhance or preserve the order of living. In contraception, what contraception is exactly what it means. Contra, against conception. In other words, it is against the natural order of things. The natural order of our bodies in intercourse is an openness to life. Contraception is out of that order. See the difference? See in the one thing, in the one case, their first case, sickness is out of the order of health, so therefore you try to eliminate it. In the other case, contraception is out of the order of of intercourse, or what intercourse means. The inner structure, as he says, and the meaning of it. And so that's why it would be wrong. That would be the difference between the two. It's something similar to a lot of people think, well, there's a similar argument made that, isn't contraception just another form of birth control? And another analogy would be this, again, with the order of things. If I drink this coffee, okay, drinking this coffee is in the order of eating or drinking, right? If I set it down and I don't eat it, drink it, that's still within the order of things, within the order of eating. In other words, the order of eating or drinking is both doing it and also not doing it. That would be like natural family planning. I choose not to drink this right now, and that's still within the order of what is eating. Contraception would be like if I drank this or ate something and then I purposely threw it up, like bulimia. That would be like contraception, like contra-eating.
It's contrary to the order of eating, so to speak.
Right. In both cases, we do not take this element into us, or we don't want it in us, as it were. But in one case, I refuse within the order of eating. In the other case, I go against the order of eating. Throwing up is not according to the order. It's not part of the order of eating, which is why it's not pleasant, But refusing something is in the order of eating. So can you understand that analogy? So that's why natural abstaining during fertile periods is not the same as contraception. It's still within the order of things. And also, when you refuse something, or let's say in intercourse, you abstain, or you're having intercourse during the infertile times. A couple, and this is where we get into the ethical part of it. He's going to talk about more and more as we get into this. The ethical part of it, what's part of the ethos of intercourse in natural family planning, is that even though we do not wish to have a conception at this time, so we're having intercourse when we believe she is not fertile, we still allow for the fact that maybe she will get pregnant. If she does, that's God's will, and we accept it. See, whereas now the bulimic is like, no, I don't want any of this food in me. This food is bad. It's going to make me fat. The natural way is to say, okay, the natural family planning would be, we do not desire conception at this point. However, there's still always a window for God. And if it happens, we accept it as His will. So the key words, there's always key words. A key word would be order. And that's with everything. How is something ordered? And that's part of the genius of the church on everything. We see how something is ordered. It's like, if I'm facing straight ahead, the sister's at the end there, if I'm facing her, and say there's no table here, and I start walking towards her, if I stay on this course, in other words, I'm lined up, my position right now is ordered to her. If I keep walking, I will eventually meet up with her. If I turn my body just 2 degrees this way, and I start walking, I will not end up next to her, even though it would seem that way from here. Why? Because I'm not ordered that way. Down the line, see, ordering means how one thing goes after the other, the next, the next, the next, the next. Where's it going to go to? How is it all consistent, And that's the difference. This is what the world doesn't see. The world does not see how something is ordered, in other words, how it evolves and moves in an order towards something. Like, for instance, a lot of people say, well, what if a couple is sterile and they're having intercourse? They know that they're sterile and they're having should they not have intercourse then? Because they know that they're not going to be pregnant and they could just be using it for, just for the sexual pleasure. Well, the answer to that is, even if you can't conceive, your body still is ordered to conception, and you still have you have what's called in potentia. In other words, you still have innately in your inner structure is potential fertility. So you're not doing anything out of the order. You still carry that order with you, even though the actual reality may not happen. The order of it is still present in potential, and in just in your structure. Okay, so order is the big question, big word here. Okay, it's like he's going to, now on page 629, number 2, the encyclical highlights that there is an essential difference, that is, a difference of an ethical nature between the 2 cases. In the former, that is, making use of the infertile period, the married couple make legitimate use of a natural disposition. In the latter, that is, the use of means which directly prevent conception, they impede the development of natural processes. See the difference? In one, you're using, again, it's that like bulimia versus refusing. Refusing to eat is part of the natural process of eating. But to eat and then to try to prevent the food from staying with you is not natural. Okay? See, notice, this is pleasant. This is also pleasant. But if I drink it and throw it up, that's not pleasant. Because it's going against the order of eating. Okay, the next part. The 2 actions flow from this difference that have, in fact, completely opposite ethical qualifications. The natural regulation of fertility is morally right. Contraception is not morally right. This essential difference between the 2 actions or ways of acting concerns their intrinsic ethical qualification, even though my predecessor, Paul VI, affirms that in one and the other case, the married couple are concordant in the positive will of avoiding children for plausible reasons, and even writes, seeking the certainty that offspring will not arrive. In these words, the document admits that, although those who make use of contraceptive practices can also be inspired by plausible reasons, still this does not change the moral qualification founded on the very structure of the conjugal act as such. In other words, even for good reasons you're using contraception, it still does not change the moral qualification, as you said. In other words, it still is wrong. You're still doing something out of the order. Still doing something that's basically dishonest with the language of the body. That's the biggest thing. Contraception is dishonest with the language of the body. Now, before I go further, I just want to say that, and you'll see here, contraception is a worldview. It's not just about the privacy of the bedroom and no one's going to tell me how many kids I'm supposed to have because they're not paying for it. I am. It's not that. Contraception is a worldview. We contracept all the time. We drink decaf coffee. We drink light beer. We destroy natural vegetation and put in asphalt and turf grass. We call that landscaping. McDonald's hamburgers. We call that eating. There are artificial foods, artificial coloring. We do many things. Contraception means doing something but not really doing it. And we live a good part of our culture like that in many ways. We contracept all over the place. Priests contracept. Yeah, priests contracept. When they come to the pulpit and they're too afraid to tell you the truth. The teaching of most priests would not address this from the pulpit because they would say, oh, it's controversial, you might offend somebody. That's contraceptive preaching. It's preaching but not really preaching. Yeah, so contraception is a worldview. Yes.
I guess along that topic, there's one of my roommates. She's a Protestant who, I know we've talked about this topic several times, and it's something that is very emotional for her. She gets very fired up about it. And it's like she was asking me the other day, what about the case of one of the spouses is HIV positive? Are you allowed to use contraception then? And I said, well, my understanding would be no. And she was like, that's insane, whatever, they're married, they're supposed to be able to have sex, all this stuff. And it's like, I don't know, I think we have a hard time understanding, the natural law as it is. So how do you, how do you go about having a reasoned debate along the lines of natural law about a topic that people get really fired up about?
Well, I find the best way, and again, it's sort of out of the playbook of John Paul II's technique in new evangelization, is to, I call it plugging into their sacred cows. In other words, affirm the value that they are trying to protect. Because most of the time, people that disagree with us, they oftentimes have the same value. Atheists are atheists because in their mind, they're all about honesty. You know that? They're all about honesty. And they just think that the whole presentation of God is dishonest. And we say, you know what? You're right. I'm about honesty too. But maybe let's talk about honesty. In other words, affirm what is important to them, but maybe invite them to another way of understanding it. Notice I do use the term invite, affirm, and invite. I didn't say argue, or judge or condemn, nor did I say, oh, whatever you want, who am I to judge, whatever you want to believe. I didn't say that either. I said affirm, but invite them to look at something differently, more fully, more holistically, less contraceptively. Most people have a contraceptive understanding of the church and its teachings.
Well, like she, for instance, doesn't want to have kids. She wants to get married, but she doesn't like kids, and she doesn't want to have kids. And so when when she asked me these questions about contraception, and I start talking about the moral law, she feels like I'm condemning her and saying
right.
she's going to hell and all of this. And it's
Right.
like, wait, how did we get from
Right.
this is what the church teaches about the natural law to you're going to hell? But it's like, when you're
Right.
when you're trying to have that discussion and people jump to those conclusions, it just makes it.
That's why I draw them in the H zone. H meaning it works like this: honesty, H. I'll put it up there. I think I did before, but it's real simple. And again, it's very affirming. If you're honest with the language of the body, with according to the natural law, that honesty results in another H word, holiness. In other words, it's real humanism, which is going to give you that ticket to happiness. See, and of course, if you do all these H's, then you get the big H, heaven. See. So what you want to do is you want to concentrate on this. You want to tell her about being happy because she wants to be happy, and you're trying to sell her good news, happiness, not condemnation. You're simply saying that the way it works is we're happy when we're honest. So when the church talks about natural law, it's simply saying if you go according to it, you'll be happy. It's not condemning you; it's just simply stating a fact. And when we're not honest with it, then we're going to be unhappy because there's going to be hurt involved. So you try to be as positive as possible, because that's what it is. It's all about good news. It's all about good news. It's just that so much of what they hear, and if she's Protestant, and many Protestants too, it's so much of what they. That's why a lot of the dialogues, unfortunately, we have to get more involved in them. More high profile, because you get into these issues like the same-sex attraction and unfortunately you get a lot of people well-meaning, but a lot of the Protestants are very kind of high profile in it, and they come out and it's very condemnatory, and the Bible says this, you're not going to the Bible, and so that's wrong, and it doesn't do it for people. You have to be able to say, you have to be able to step into their, see, that's again the John Paul thing, the phenomenology. Step into their reality. What are they feeling? It's okay. What they're feeling is all right. It's good. I understand it. It's like he's saying here over and over again, I know you're telling me this is wrong. How can you impose this teaching on me? I know that. But here's what I want you to consider that's going to help you.
Do Protestants teach us also the whole abstain from contraception thing? Or is she within the natural order of her own religion? Should we be encouraging other people of other religions?
Yeah.
To follow this also?
No, you encourage the value that they want. The values. They want happiness, they want love, they want honesty. Those are the values that they're trying to protect, what they want. They think you're trying to condemn them for those values. You're trying to take those away from them. What you're saying is, no, we want you to have precisely what it is you want. We want you to have happiness. We want you to know love. But it comes by way of this order. There's a way to that. That's all we're saying. Remember, you're simply pointing to a truth and telling a person they'll get what it is they want if they follow that truth.
I think it goes back, I'm sorry, no, Justin?
Chris, close. My brother's name is Justin.
This happens to me all the time. Okay, anyway, I always get the sister's name and brother's name right. What you were saying about we're so used to just, it's not so much doing what we want, well I guess it is, but we can control so much in our lives now.
Mm-hmm.
We're not 700 years ago we were at the mercy of the elements, and we were farmers and we needed rain and we couldn't manipulate anything hardly. And now we can manipulate everything in our lives. I mean, everything.
That's the very next section we're going to get into.
Okay.
Exactly. No, go ahead.
I'll leave it be.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh.
Finish that.
And suddenly we're asking people, we're saying, yeah, that's fine, you can do all that stuff, you know, ice cube maker in your refrigerator, our refrigerator just broke, and we're like, what, you get an ice cube maker? But when it comes to this really huge chunk of your life, it's gonna like massively change your life, whether you have 10 kids or 1 or none, we're going, with that, you hands off.
Right.
Hands off. It's like, what?
Right.
You know, it's so, but, and I think what you said about being a world view is so important, that
Right.
it's this completely out of touch with nature. I mean, we think
Right.
if we're a nature lover, we're in touch with nature because we shop at, what are
Whole
those, that
Foods.
store?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is
Whole
it?
Foods.
Whole Foods. And we go, you know, we go backpacking or whatever, you know, and we, you know, donate to the World Wildlife Fund, and we're vegetarians.
Right.
Like, that is good, and it's, the mentality, that's good, you can work with that mentality, but it's still not what, you know.
Right. Like,
is.
last week, was it? End of March, where they had that, was it Earth Day or something? Lights out or whatever, it's to turn your lights off. And I am involved in environmental things. In fact, our church is known for that. We've received awards. People come and speak to us, and they ask me to speak and all that. Environmental groups and all that. I purposely did not observe that day, even though that's what you're supposed to do if you're in an environment. No, it's not. I didn't observe that day precisely because I respect the environment.
Not for just 1 hour.
Exactly. And that it's not about, it's about right reason and natural law and the right ordering of things. It's not just like, okay, you're an environmentalist, that means you do only this, everybody does this, and you don't do that over here. That's not reason and natural law. That's trend and fad and tyranny, and make ourselves feel good.
It's a level view.
Yes.
I have a question, because that opened up something really good. It's like, we're all striving for, to honesty, happiness, and holiness, and heaven ultimately.
Right.
But if you stir it the wrong way, say, okay, if you go back and you say, oh, well, okay, the church is not, in my bedroom, or he has HIV, or she has, but it's what happens to the soul when you go and do that. You're in darkness.
Right.
And that takes us away from God.
Well, yes, and see, that's just like what Sister was saying, what we're going to get into this next section, that, see, things work best if you accept the fact that we have a soul, and that you have to consider that soul that we're a embodied spirit. We have a soul and a body that works together. You can't separate the two. But again, it comes back to having the total vision of a human person. Who is the human person? We're not just a body. We're not just a soul. We're a body, mind, soul, spirit composite. And we work that way in everything. You must always consider that in everything. We're psychosomatic beings. And you can never separate that. And we do. We think we can. We keep thinking we can cheat the natural order. That's our problem. And because for A, we don't observe it. And if we do, we think we can ignore it. We're the masters of our own destiny. And we always get burned. And we're going to see that in this next section. So let's start this next section. It's page 630, number 5. Here's a really great one you should memorize. The theology of the body is not merely a theory, but rather a specific evangelical Christian pedagogy of the body. This pedagogic character comes from the character of the Bible, and above all of the gospel as a salvific message revealing what man's true good is for the sake of shaping, according to the measure of this good, his life on earth and the perspective of the hope of the future world.
What page is that from?
630. Page 630, number 5. Following this line, in other words, following theology of the body, Humanae Vitae answers the question about man's true good as a person, inasmuch as he is male and female, about what corresponds to the dignity of man and woman when one is dealing with the important problem of the transmission of life in conjugal life. Okay, now, we're going to get into what Sister was talking about here. Down the bottom of 630, second paragraph. The problem lies in maintaining the adequate relationship between that which is defined as domination of the forces of nature, on one hand, domination of the forces of nature, and self-mastery, here on the other hand, which is indispensable for the human person. Contemporary man shows a tendency of transferring the methods proper to the first sphere to those of the second. That is exactly what Sister was talking about. And that's actually what the whole 120 pages of introduction of this book is telling us about too. Finally, and above all, man has made stupendous progress in the domination and rational organization of the forces of nature. We read in the encyclical such that he tends to extend this domination to his own total being, to the body, to physical life, to social life, even to the laws which regulate the transmission of life. This extension of the sphere of the means of the domination of the forces of nature threatens the human person, for whom the methods of self-mastery is and remains specific. It, that is self-mastery, corresponds in fact to the fundamental constitution of the person. It is a perfectly natural method. The transposition of artificial means, by contrast, breaks the constitutive dimension of the person, deprives man of the subjectivity proper to him, and turns him into an object of manipulation. That's the zinger. See, again, since we entered the scientific era, human beings for the first time in history have been able to do things to nature we couldn't do before. Okay, it's wonderful in many ways. But we have to remember, though, that nature, the purpose of nature is not simply to dominate it and to manipulate and to use it. And especially that's not the case applied to the human person. And that's precisely what contraception does. It's going to manipulate, through technology, things, this natural order and its meaning. And it's going to result in, has resulted in, will result in bad things. Yes.
Do you think that dominion that we've had over nature for so long is part of why the natural law is difficult to understand? Like, I guess
Yes.
I look at the fact that until 1930, all Christian denominations condemned contraception.
Right.
But it's like today, it seems like the Catholic Church, with the exception of a few other groups, it's kind of the one church that still says this is wrong. At least that's the official teaching. How many Catholics actually observe it?
Yes. I think that has a lot to do with it, because you see, you have to take, like he said in here, he said you have to take reason and intellect to everything. For instance, I can smash this cup against the wall. Because I can do it, should I do it? Right, reason and intellect would tell me not to do that. Okay, that's what we have to do for everything. That's what we're not doing. We're saying because we can create condoms and stop, to some extent, conception, because we can make babies in a test tube, that we should therefore do it. See, there's no reasoning, there's no informed reason, there's just manipulation. Same thing, the theology of the body is also best thing for your health. Most of our major causes of death in our culture today are lifestyle-based, habit-based. And they have a lot to do with the foods that we take in, which in many ways are highly manipulated foods. They're very processed and so on. That is killing us. Now, isn't it wonderful that we can process and make these food and make all this food grow and have all this excess of food, but what is it we're taking in? We're not taking in real food in many ways, and that's hurting us, actually. That's what's causing the cancer and the diabetes and the heart disease, believe it or not. You're going to see it's happening more and more as more and more people are getting into it. You're going to see a lot of things being debunked that have become like, the gospel in terms of food and health and all that. And believe it or not, you're going to see even the whole cholesterol thing debunked. In fact, it already is, just has to get out there. What causes us problems in our health is not the natural food itself, no matter what it is, fats, everything. It's when it becomes manipulated by us. And your body can't process it properly, because your body knows the theology of the body. See? And when something is in there that's not according to the order of things, it hurts the body. It's processed foods, and animals filled with hormones that we're taking in. And that's what's causing our trouble. It's not the food itself. You know what? One of the things that cancer needs to grow, one of the most important elements that makes cancer grow? Sugar. You can't even breathe the air outside without breathing in sugar in our culture.
Easter weekend.
Yeah. That, I'm guilty as I try to keep it minimal, but I still have it more than I should. I admit it. But it's also everywhere.
Yeah, high fructose corn syrup and all that stuff is in everything.
I enjoy. I get a kick out of these. I still enjoy it. I guess I'm like a kid. I enjoy Pop-Tarts in the morning. But boy, oh boy, I got to search far and wide for Pop-Tarts that are just plain Pop-Tarts. They're covered with all this goop, this sugar, like that thick on them. I can't take it. It puts me into pancreatic shock just looking at it. Why do you have to do that? They're perfectly fine without that. Okay. But no, see, that's why I say the theology of the body is the answer to all life's questions, because theology of the body is just a code word for the sacramental worldview, for the honest view of everything. Everything. Food, the stars in the sky, water, everything. Yes.
We've got Tina and then somebody online.
So I guess like what you were saying about like that nature shouldn't be dominated,
Mm-hmm.
and that like manipulation. Okay, so I guess I'm not really sure how to ask my question. If there is manipulation and coercion, like involved in a sexual act,
Mm-hmm.
where like in some type of abusive relationship, or if it's even with two people who like have no relationship with each other, I guess how do you, and where the person who's being abused, how do you talk about like why that person shouldn't, I think there are some people who would say that that person should have the right or whatever to contraception for safety.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
how
Mm-hmm.
do you approach
Yeah.
that, especially when the natural act is, it seems that they would have to be open, almost, like, but to whatever
Yeah,
happens, but
I think if I understand your question right, this was a big question at the time when Humanae Vitae was coming out, because basically, like, say for instance, like say maybe in a case like that one of the spouses, say the husband mostly, doesn't want to, you want sex whenever, right? Is that what you're saying? Something like that, and she doesn't want, or if it's an abusive thing, yeah. That was one of the arguments that came out when Humanae Vitae came out, arguments against it, against Humanae Vitae. And the answer is that you deal with that problem in its comprehensively. In other words, you deal with the problem of the abuse and the relationship and their whole spirituality, sexuality. You just don't let it go on and say, okay, well the source is here, take this, protect yourself, and then basically let it not tend to the whole picture, to for the whole thing. In other words, you get to the real problem. Is what I'm saying. And so that, in other words, that person, for instance, they may have to step out of that relationship, or the church totally sanctions that. Step away. I'm not talking about, they're not saying go get divorced. They're saying if you are being abused and it's bad enough, you need to actually step out of that, or step away from that, and try to get the proper help to heal that whole thing. You're not supposed to be a victim, but if you tell them we'll use contraception, you're still telling them to be a victim. So all you're trying to do there is prevent a certain consequence, but you're still making them a victim, allowing them to be a victim. You need to actually pull them out of the whole. You have to look at that. You have to go at the whole situation holistically, in a very integrated way. That's what I would like if I was counseling a couple like that. I'd say, okay, in this situation, if it's really bad enough, it said, sorry, you have a right. You spend time at someone else's home for a little bit, for a week. We're going to talk about this. We're going to intervene, and that's that kind of thing. You would have to attack the whole problem. Yeah, you had a question?
With the comment that abusive relationships are without the order. It's not within the order.
Right. Exactly. It's out of the order. And what passed for just normal relating was actually what we know today is, in many ways, of course, we sometimes go to extremes, as abuse. Things that were not. See, for those of you who are watching that may be always longing for the good old days of the Catholic Church, well, let me tell you something. Let me tell you what marriage preparation was like in the pre-Vatican II days. The couple came in, sat down with the priest, and the priest turned to the wife, the bride-to-be, and said, "Don't ever deny your husband." And that was it.
If he goes off with someone else, it's your fault.
Yeah, that's right. That was marriage preparation in the good old days of the 1950s church, where things were so much better. And that wasn't even real Catholicism. Not even the 1950s church was truly Catholic, which is why Vatican II had to happen. The real Vatican II, not the abuses. All right, the real Vatican II. The church always needs to be renewed constantly. It's in a constant state of being renewed. And you never say at any one time, well, the good old days and those good old days. No, those good old days had many good things, but they also had things that needed renewal. So that opened the door to a lot of abuse. And then what happened was, then in the 1960s, 50s, they started telling women that breastfeeding was bad. Mother's milk was bad. Well, that breastfeeding helped to keep a natural cycle, natural infertility. Well, they took that away, and these women were getting pregnant left and right, and they're going to the priest and say, you say I can't use birth control, but I'm getting pregnant all the time. Well, because they were told not to breastfeed.
By the formula company.
Yeah, by the formula. Yeah. And what did that do? It set women up for contraception. That was the solution. And they had this big tension now, because they knew that the church said no, but they're getting pregnant, and their husband wasn't told, like John Paul, if you read his Love and Responsibility in Theology of the Body, he was not told how to be sensitive to his wife and so on, and in sync and all that. They weren't told that. So here were these poor women of the 1950s and the 60s that were in this real bind. And so they were almost forced into contracepting.
What about women who are ill and have problems with, their uterus, and they have to have it removed?
Yeah.
It's because of health issue. What happens?
Well, as I mentioned before, you still have you can still have intercourse, but you still go by the same. See, like he said in here, there's a norm, there's a moral norm to it that underlies it all. Whether you're fertile or not, or sterile or not, you still approach each other not as object. In other words, sex is not unbridled concupiscence. It's not, just legalized sex, as it were. You have to abstain till you're married, and when you're married, you have all you want. It's not what it is. You still approach each other as if you are still fertile. Or at least with the same spirituality, I should say.
I guess maybe along those lines, just really quickly, talking about contraception and sort of like the health issue or whatever.
Yeah.
I've run into a lot of young women who were put on contraception because they had irregular periods or they had problems with that, and they say like, thank God I'm on contraception. I feel so much better. I'm not going, off my rocker every month.
Right.
I'm not, how do you kind of
Okay, that too was nonsense.
Right.
See, anytime you take something like, in most cases, when you know you're in trouble, something's wrong. When the solution is take this man-made pill, that's your solution. That's not the whole answer, not the answer. And a girl who would say that about herself would need other. See, I always look at things. You always go after things very holistically. It's her attitude, it's her spirituality, it's the home life, it's her foods. A lot of it's food, believe it or not, or lack of. It's imbalance from lack of whatever vitamins, like sleep. You look at the whole picture. See. Notice what we do, what they do, how they fool us. They zero on one thing, and they make that so big, and they say, okay, well, let's address that one thing. Here, take this pill. It's like if there's a leak, stop it, stick your finger in it, rather than, wait a minute, what's wrong with this wall? There must be a pipe behind this wall that's leaking. Let's go look at that. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, there's a hole in the wall, stick your finger in it. So that's how we look at things, and we think that that's curing it. When it actually can be more harm than good. So you never just zero in on the one thing and then say, well, here's this magic man-made solution for it. You always go after things holistically. And 9 times out of 10, the answer is in the holistic approach. And that's the Catholic approach. Like I said, I won't stop until I impose my religion on everybody. Because everybody will be happy then. And anyone who thinks they won't is because they don't know what Catholic is. They have a contraceptive understanding of Catholicism, which is what most Catholics have. Not all, but many, most. Certainly non-Catholics do. Because if you really understood Catholicism, you couldn't reject it. You couldn't, if you really understood it. Okay. Number 2 on 631. The human body is not only the field of reactions of a sexual character, but it is at the same time the means of the expression of a man as an integral whole. See, there's the holistic thing. Of the person, which reveals itself through the language of the body. This language has an important interpersonal meaning, especially in the area of the reciprocal relations between man and woman. In addition, our earlier analysis shows that, in this case, the language of the body should express at a determinate level the truth of the sacrament by participating in the eternal plan of love, the mystery hidden in God. The language of the body becomes, in fact, a prophetism of the body, as it were. One can say the humanity carries this truth about the human body in its masculinity and femininity to its final consequences. Not only its logical and moral, but also its practical and pastoral. What? Practical? This is practical? Tell me not to have sex? Come on. Yes, practical and pastoral consequences. The unity of the two aspects of the problem, the sacramental or theological and the personalistic dimension, corresponds to the overall revelation of the body. From this derives also the connection of the strictly theological vision with the ethical vision, which appeals to the natural law. I'm going to skip to 633. One can say that in the case, number 7, 633. One can say that in the case of an artificial separation of these two meanings in the conjugal act, a real bodily union is brought about, but it does not correspond to the inner truth and dignity of personal communion, communio personarum. This communion demands, in fact, that the language of the body be expressed reciprocally in the integral truth of its meaning. If this truth is lacking, one can speak neither the truth of the reciprocal gift of self nor of the reciprocal acceptance of oneself by the person. Such a violation, by the way, this is a very important paragraph, such a violation of the inner order of conjugal communion, a communion that plunges its roots in the very order of the person, constitutes the essential evil of the contraceptive act. Okay, now this is it. That's what it all comes down to. Basically, to translate it, mark this page 633, paragraph 7. That's it. See, he even puts in italics. Constitutes the essential evil of the contraceptive act. What is the essential evil? Why is it evil? Because it basically is lying with the language of the body. It's setting up a dishonesty, and that's going to hurt the relationship. It's going to hurt the world. So that's why I say these key words we start off with, reread in truth or honesty, is the way to understand it all. It's not, you're not being honest with what that indisputably the action of two people in the marital act is saying, speaking the language of total gift, of reciprocity, receiving and giving of total self, that is open always to the potential of life. Contraception sets up a lie, dishonesty, because it's saying we're not really giving each other totally. We're not receiving each other totally. We're not receiving each other's fruitfulness. And so therefore we're not really, in fact, I think we're coming up on a paragraph where he says, it really isn't love. It really isn't love making.
Thomas Merton said that same thing. There's a paragraph, have you read No Man is an Island?
Oh, yes, yes.
He has this whole paragraph about how, man thinks that he knows what love is, and yet, the church knows for it, and it's sort of this scathing, condemnation of sex with contraception, but when it's compared to what he's saying right there, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's not really love, which is why couples that contracept, that's why their divorce rate is so high. And those who don't, their divorce rate is so low. Okay, so do we go to 8:30, is it? 8:30. Oh, is that when we're supposed to normally go?
Y'all want to stay?
Oh, okay.
Can you stay 5?
Yeah, I can, yeah. Okay, see, I'm going to, let's see, where is that paragraph on love? Okay, I see that. Okay, I just want to look at page 638. Going to jump a little bit because we're running out of time. This is that what we hear sometimes from a lot of non-Catholics, even Catholics, especially our Protestant friends, who will agree with us to an extent, but they'll say, but it's another form of contraception. Here's again that answer. This is in the second paragraph of number 4 on page 638. The encyclical places the ethical dimension of the problem in the foreground, underlying the role of the virtue of temperance rightly understood. In the area of this dimension, there is also an adequate method of acting. In the common way of thinking, it often happens that the method, detached from the ethical dimension proper to it, is applied in a merely functional and even utilitarian way. When one separates the natural method from the ethical dimension, that goes back to what you were saying about if they have a hysterectomy, it's the ethical dimension. When one separates the natural method from the ethical dimension, one no longer sees a difference between it and other methods, artificial means, and one ends up speaking about it as if it were just another form of contraception. See that? See there?
What number is that?
Number Second paragraph, number 4 on page 638. See, that's the answer to our Protestant friends, that it's not just in the method, it's in the ethical dimension underlies it. In other words, what are you really communicating to each other? You know, through the language.
It kind of scares me in a way when people can't understand that. Like, sometimes I have conversations, and no matter what you say, they think that NFP is the same thing as
Yeah.
perception, and they just cannot see the difference, and that scares me. And I think they're trying. It's not that they're, blocking because they want what they want, but it's like, and it's not some like high, lofty, theological thing. It's just they cannot see that, like, to have sex and then thwart it at the same time is different from not having sex.
Yes.
To do an act or not do an act, to them it's all the same. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I think one thing that people have a hard time seeing too is the notion that, like, we talk about body language and like the actual act of having sex. That there's this act of self-giving in that. That people would look at, like you talked early on, Father, about describing in detail what happens during
Yeah.
sex, and people would sort of like reduce that to just a sort of primal thing or a physical
Yeah.
thing or a scientific thing, and like the notion that there's a sort of sacramental act that takes place during union,
Yeah.
during like ejaculation and
Yeah.
like all that stuff. Like, I think people sometimes have a hard time thinking like that.
Yes, you hit it right in the head. That is the problem. They have a hard time thinking sacramentally, thinking mystically. That's what we lost, especially, well, it's always been a battle to do that. It's always been the question of all life, but especially since in the last 500 years, when we entered the scientific era, it's like that part of our brain has little by little been anesthetized. That's why whenever I do theology by talks, I always sometimes tell people, okay, let's go like this now. Start waking up this part of your brain now. Otherwise, you won't understand what I'm saying. Wake up the mystical. Wake it up there. You got to think mystically, and that's what all this is. It's the mystical, bringing us to the mystical view of this. In other words, the why behind it. What does this mean? Yes, you can explain it as a biological function, but why? What is it saying?
But it's also what it means to be human. Like,
Yes.
I know we can't ever like really detach ourselves from God and speak, like, put God out of the picture and just try to speak about the human person, but I think some atheists come pretty close to understanding that we are special
They do.
and
They do.
different, and everything we do as humans, and so,
There's a whole lot, but I'm going to skip look because there's a couple of really salient zingers I want to get to before we go.
I have a question regarding that because, our society is so, back in the 60s, you would never saw all the horrible naked woman. Now it's any channel with, I think the defamation of women, they just stereotypes the woman as, the harlot, and everything that you watch is so promiscuous that, your children, we just never watch those things, and now the children are, it's nothing, they're having sex, and you're like, wait a minute, you're 8 years old, you shouldn't be talking about this. So it's the promiscuity of our society, and what it's doing to all of us, as a family unit, because now it's just acceptable, and it's not acceptable.
and women are not winning. I'm sorry, we're not winning in this culture.
You hear what?
And men aren't either. When men don't win, women don't win. When women don't
Right.
win, men don't win. But we are certainly very big losers.
Yes, you are. You are the big loser because you are the prize, you see. The man is just in the way. You get him, you knock him down, get him out of the way, but the prize, the goal is the woman. It was so from the beginning. Remember, it's always about the bride. The whole order of creation is all about you ladies. It is. And our job as men is to make sure of that. That's right. Okay. Let's go to 646 at the top. 646. If conjugal chastity, and chastity in general, manifests itself at first as an ability to resist the concupiscence of the flesh, it subsequently reveals itself as a singular ability to perceive love and realize those meanings of the language of the body that remain completely unknown to concupiscence itself, and progressively enrich the spousal dialogue of the couple by purifying, deepening, at the same time simplifying it. For this reason, the ascesis of continence, now ascesis means asceticism, in other words, discipline, self-discipline, saying no to self, fasting and so on. The ascesis of continence about which the encyclical speaks does not impoverish affective manifestations, but on the contrary, it makes them spiritually more intense and thus enriches them. I'm going to translate that in a way that everyone in the world can understand. Translated, the Church's teaching is aimed at helping people achieve the best sex. A much more intense experience of sexuality. The Church is not down on sex. The Church is very up on sex. It's the world who's down on sex. There's one he makes a little distinction about arousal and emotion, which I think is important. We'll read just one paragraph on page 650. Page 650, number 6, the second paragraph. Arousal seeks, first of all, to express itself in the form of sensual and bodily pleasure. That is, it tends toward the conjugal act. See, it's ordered to. See, that gives you now a clue for people, especially young couples, and they date and all that, what's right for dating and all that. Okay, is this action, what is it ordered to? Is it an action of arousal? What is arousal ordered to? Where's it supposed to go? It's supposed to go to the conjugal act. Can you engage in the conjugal act? No. Well, then you shouldn't be doing arousal. See, get it? It's not because arousal is dirty and bad. It's good. It's just out of place. It's not honest because you can't take it to its ordered conclusion. Okay. Arousal seeks, first of all, to express itself in the form of sensual violence, that it tends towards the conjugal act, which, depending on the natural rhythms of fertility, brings with it the possibility of procreation. By contrast, emotion, called forth by another human being as a person, even if it is conditioned in its emotive content by the femininity or masculinity of the other, does not through itself tend to the conjugal act, but limits itself to other manifestations of affection, in which the spousal meaning of the body expresses itself and which nevertheless do not include its potentially procreative meaning. Now that's a very important thing we do for married couples, and we have them learn to express affection in other ways that aren't arousal based. That intimacy can be experienced and expressed in other ways. In other words, that's why he's saying there's a difference between emotion and arousal. We tend to equate the two. Yes.
But the whole, you're not supposed to get into arousal. How far does that extend? So that's saying, you're saying, you're not supposed to be, kissing on dates and stuff? Is this what the Church is trying to say?
Okay. It's the answer actually is twofold. First of all, it's about what do we mean by dating? And secondly, what we mean by kissing, yes. Yeah, that it would probably, if you really want to be true and honest about this, because remember the church would look at dating differently. They look at it the way a lot of cultures, some still do today, but most of them used to do a long time ago. In a sense, you didn't date. You got to know each other, girl met boy, with their families together. Families did things together. Boy met girl together. And maybe they had a little time together within range of the family. Girl did not get her own apartment and have boy stay over, or vice versa. It was, in fact, in some cultures today, it's still a scandal for a girl who's not married to move out of the house of her parents and to get her own apartment. So, in one sense, the answer to the question, you'd have to back up and address the dating thing. So you figure in that situation, the guy and the girl are not going to be somewhere off kissing each other, at least heavily. They would find attraction to each other. They would see each other frequently within the context of family mostly, and or something thereof. And then they would make a decision to marry. And that's how they did it. They didn't have dating as we know it today. Dating basically is, again, it's like contraceptive marriage. It's playing at marriage. That's why kids dive into intimacy right away. It's right away into, this heavy stuff, immediately. Yes.
If sexual activity outside of marriage is sort of against the natural order because arousal, because sexual activity is ordered towards, the conjugal act, how does someone who is living celibately, either because they're not married yet or because, they felt called to a celibate life, from what I understand, it wouldn't be proper to say that they, I guess, how do you express yourself sexually as a celibate person? I guess in a way that's not physical, because physical sexual acts are ordered towards the conjugal act.
Right. Well, that's the whole witness value and also challenge of celibacy, is that you express it. The physical part of expressing it is more of the, like he's saying here, would come out more in expression, more like filial expressions of love. Hugging, handshake, kissing, in a filial way, not in a romantic way. And then the rest of your life becomes a whole subject. Your question is very big, becomes a whole subject in itself. Which probably, when we return, we should probably start dealing with these kinds of subjects, like applying this maybe, with what we've, the principles. But you live spousally. So the key is living spousally. And you don't have the direct sexual physical expressions per se, but you do have spousal expressions and a spousal life. So you're still living spousally, and in a sense, romantically too, with your spouse. For the sisters, it's Christ himself. For me, it's the church. And you live basically by the same principles as someone, being married, courting, and so on. But yeah, you don't have the specific physical expressions. And yeah, that's challenging. That's the challenge of celibacy. Sure, that's why few people choose it, because it takes incredible, as he says here, self-mastery. But that self-mastery is not done just by yourself. It's done through the treasures of the church, through spiritual direction, prayer, spousal living, fellowship, support, community, confession, sacraments. Yes?
I think another element that's very, very absent in our society is the principle of discipline.
Yeah, exactly it. Yeah. Right, precisely. This word ascesis, asceticism. And it is, yes, it is every bit as challenging as you would imagine. But again, you're called to it. You're given certain graces. You avail yourself of the graces of the church. And it is precisely like even John Paul says in the Theology about it, it's precisely in the difficulty of it, the challenge of it, that is the witness value. Because the fact that it's difficult is an affirmation of the beauty of marriage, human sexuality. And it's that much more of a witness. That what witness would there be if there was no great shakes about sexuality? But you see someone who's celibate, and it strikes you. Wow, they've made it serious. Yeah. It's a giving up, but also a positive. It's a choosing and a positive at the same time. Yes.
I have a question. You talk about the religious life,
Mm-hmm.
priesthood, and what about single women? I know, I myself, I'm single, and I know many women
Yeah.
that are single.
You live by the same principles as a celibate, except similar principles, except your singleness is not ordered to permanency. In other words, you always have an open-endedness to your singleness. You can be married. And if you never do, you still have that. It's like the door is still open for you. So you have a similar life as a celibate, but not exactly. You live, yes, in terms of continence and like that, yes, but you still live spousally too. In other words, you try to give of yourself to others. Living spousally means making a gift of self to others, whether you're single, married, celibate.
Or even we as a single women, can we say that we're espoused to Christ too?
You can, yeah, you can make that. You can make that partial commitment as such, yeah. Even though you still have an openness. There's still always that openness inherent in your singleness. See, singleness by its nature means you are open to an eventuality of marriage. Doesn't mean you will be married, but you're open to that. Whereas when you're celibate, you're not, because you're married, as it were. You actually are married to, yeah, already, yeah. But you live by very similar. See, if I was giving a talk to celibates, and then I was giving a talk in the next room, I gave a talk to married couples, I would speak in the exact same terms. You would hardly know which audience was which. Which again is a whole other subject, because you live by the same principles. Because it's a matter of living a life spousally. And that requires gift of self and dying to self. It requires the self-mastery. It requires everything that Humanae Vitae is saying. And that's why John Paul II said in here, in the only way he could say it was that Humanae Vitae ultimately is, the questions raised here are woven through the whole theology of the body, and like vice versa. I just want to show you that the thing I passed out to you, that was, see, the four prophecies, I call them, the church against a contraceptive spirituality. And these were four things are mentioned in Humanae Vitae. And then you can see what's happened since they were disobeyed. Every one of those prophecies came true.
Can you read some of that for the people online?
Yes, and if they want to, I got this information. The prophecies are in, I call them prophecies. Prophecies are in Humanae Vitae, but the statistics and are in Janet Smith's book, Why Humanae Vitae Was Right, from which I probably can get here at this bookstore, right? Ignatius Press. Yeah, Why Humanae Vitae Was Right by Janet Smith is where I got the actual statistics, which means they're actually several years old already, but look how close they still apply. Okay, for instance, and now I want to look at the first two. I won't go if we have time, but first one, contraception would lead to conjugal infidelity and a general lowering of morality. Okay, that's what the church said, and what the world's saying. Get out of here! What do you know? Okay, here's the results. 4 out of 10 teens have had at least one pregnancy. 75% of all African American children are born out of wedlock, and 1 out of every 4 is born to a teenage mother. Now, you know what? Now it's 1 out of every 2. Yes. And the Hispanic community is not far behind. 1 out of every other kid is born out of wedlock in the black community. That's not a put down on blacks. It's well, where does Planned Parenthood set up their camps? You know. Okay, over 1 million abortions a year, nearly half are by teenagers. More than 1 in 7 teens has had at least one abortion, and 80% of those were using contraceptives.
Are these all statistics in the U.S.?
Yes, U.S. Yeah. There's some recent articles out I came across too about HIV in Africa. You know, where they are passing out the most condoms, where they have the most HIV. But what did our president do? He repealed that Mexico City law that says that we are to go into other countries and say, if you want our aid, you must pass out condoms and have abortion. Otherwise, we won't give you aid.
And they're ripping that. We don't even hear the reaction. They're so
I know.
angry in these other countries saying, why why aren't you putting
Yeah.
the money into prenatal care? We still have this huge infant mortality rate. Why don't you help pregnant women instead of killing our people?
Yes. This is,
Kenyan doctors are
Yeah.
freaking mad. They're so
and this was signed by our president in his first few days of office at midnight. Totally repealed what the previous administration had tried to stop. I'm not trying to just focus on in politics, but it's a fact of the matter. The fact that you see what we're up against, and a stroke of a pen, he repeals and changes this mega thing that's going to influence. And this is part of why, this is part of what other countries cite, especially, and this is not justification, obviously, but it is what some of the, more militant Muslims and so on like that point to. They say, why are you imposing that garbage on our cultures? Because Muslims are not into contraception or abortion, and they see us coming with our imposition. You've got to take these. You've got to take these. Well, that's part of what they have against us, but you don't hear that. And why are you coming and bringing that pollution to our culture, Who are we to do that? Okay, number 2. The man, now here's another thing. Listen to this, number 2. For the chauvinistic, sexist, patriarchal church, the man will lose respect for the woman and no longer care for her physical and psychological equilibrium, and will come to the point of considering her as a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment and no longer as his respected and beloved companion. Aren't those beautiful words? The church was the sole voice that stood up like a prophet saying, this is going to hurt women. The only voice that did. And that voice is labeled as chauvinist and anti-woman. The only voice. The whole world crucified the church for this. What's the result? Well, feminist agenda says that woman's body is not as good as a man's because it is fertile. Got to do something about that. Plug that up, baby. Be like a man. Encourages non-marital sexual union, which hinders the ability to adequately bond with one's spouse. Divorce rate is 50% for those who contracept, but near zero for those who practice natural family planning. Now, we were talking earlier with the sisters about this there's a whole study about the pheromones, about that, girls, about the pheromones? There's a scent that you give off that's picked up by the olfactory nerves of men, and the contraceptive pill actually diminishes that, which makes you less attractive to men. But it also makes you, this actual study, it actually makes you more vulnerable to making bad choices in men.
The like depletion of these pheromones.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They actually did this study.
It's like too similar to you, which is not.
Yeah, it's the other part of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Too similar to you in blood type and whatever.
Yeah. They actually did a study. It was by a guy named Lionel Tiger. He did it in the 70s, and it's come out recently. They're rediscovering this study, and it's an amazing thing. They did it with monkeys. They had this monkey that they put the female monkeys on the pill, and the male monkey was like, he had no interest in them anymore. In fact, he started acting crazy. He started to stimulate himself. He started to go after male monkeys. And when they took the females off the pill, then he was okay. Yeah. And so and that's why they think that there's a lot why men are going to pornography, and because in a sense they're less interested in women, and they don't know why. And that's why women are dressing more provocatively too. Why styles got more provocative, because they're trying to draw men's attention, because they just use it as an object, or they're not so interested in them. I, as a priest, believe me, counsel people. It's amazing how many sexless couples there are today. Couples that just aren't having sex, intercourse, married couples. It's funny. We live in a world where people couldn't conceive of being celibate, and then when they get married, they don't have relations for a while. And that's part of the reason. We've killed our interest in each other. In the name of, take this pill, you can have all the sex you want. Sexual freedom. The church warned us, but what do they know, those homophobic, chauvinistic crusty celibates in Rome, stay out of my bedroom. Okay, we did, so now you're happy? Okay, number 3. Contraception will place a dangerous weapon in the hands of public authorities who take no heed of moral exigency. Sterilization forced upon third world nations, like I just said. Underpopulation nations such as Germany, France, and Italy. Within 50 years, Europe will be 50% Muslim.
They say that in places like Russia and Japan, the sort of like demographic is becoming way too top heavy.
Yeah.
We have all of these older people and none of the young labor force to support
They
them.
don't have young force support. That's why they're importing. They have to import immigrants, and in Europe, the immigrants come largely from the Middle East. Where do you think the terrorists? Where do you think 9/11, that plan was hatched, was conceived? In Europe, because that's where they are. Most of the terrorist attacks were conceived by terrorist cells in Europe, because they're in Europe in such great numbers. So if you really want to look at it mathematically, we can't win the war on terror numerically, because they're going to just outpopulate us. Ooh. Imagine Christian Europe becoming Muslim, imposing Sharia law. Why? Because we thumbed our nose at the church.
And Sharia law is really good for women.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh.
So if you have young children, well, not young children, they're, in their 30s, and you know that the girl stays over. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't condone it, but it happens.
Mm-hmm.
With my son, I would love them to get married and have babies. That's what I want in my heart.
Yeah.
But they don't listen to me. They're both Catholics, and I keep saying they were great, St. Ignatius, Providence Catholic High School. They have good moral brains, good parents, like.
Yeah. Well, it's
What is good to pray for these?
it's the world view. It's how your fundamental your fundamental view. Like, we can expose people to a lot of Catholic, and we should. But unless they really understand it, it's presented as a fundamental worldview, how you see everything, sacramentally, which is what the whole theology body does. You're going to be vulnerable to the world's view. A lot of young people are. Yeah, manipulate. Oh yeah, it's just because, we're swimming in it, we're breathing it. It's just.
Well, it just bombards, because I
Yeah.
feel like, like even what's happening with government. When it happens in the bedroom, the dishonesty, it leads on to your corporate.
You got it.
It's
You got it.
It's hand in hand.
Absolutely. That's why John Paul. That's why.
Just leads to more and more.
Can't be honest at that level.
And the final one, contraception will lead us to think that we have limitless dominion over our own body, as we've been talking about all this evening. Test tube babies, surrogate mothers, assisted suicide, euthanasia, human cloning, all these things. And the result, and the confusion, the test tube babies, then you get into, oh my goodness, it's so convoluted I can't even keep it straight in my head about, yeah, and what do you call the rights, custody and all that of these embryos, and who's the father, and then they can come and sue these, and oh my Lord, and oh, it's compounded. It's just unbelievable.
This is like some good news, sort of. I was watching William Shatner's Raw Nerve. I don't know if you've seen that. He's like a talk show host now. He's like the male Barbara Walters. He gets people to say stuff they don't think they were going to say and all this. Anyway, Jenna Jameson was on. She's like the queen of porn. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's like 34 years old now. She's been married twice. She got both of her husbands into the porn industry because she thought, well, I'm married now. I should really only be having sex with one guy on camera. So she got her husbands into it. Well, and the thing is, she's totally defending the porn industry. It's the greatest thing on earth, and it's still, she has her own channel now and her own empire. So, it's still her bread and butter, even though she's gotten out of the acting part of it. But this is what she said. Her second husband, they were, on camera having sex, and it was like for the first time she listened to the language of her body. It's completely contradictory to everything else she said, but this is what she said. And I said to myself, wait a minute. He, her husband, should be rescuing me from this. And he's not. The next day she left him.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so the porn industry is a good thing. You only get rescued for something that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And yet she knew, somewhere inside of her, she knew this was
Mhm.
wrong, and it wasn't right, and it wasn't good
Right.
for her. And he wasn't saving her from this. He was going
Right.
along with her because it's what she wanted,
Right.
she wanted. And so anyway, I'm praying for Jenna ever since then. If she could find theology, the body.
Yeah.
Imagine if some big
Yeah.
porn star would come out
Exactly.
and go, it's this, folks, this is what I was
See-
looking for, you know.
See, sister, you know what you're saying is so true, and that's one of my personal quests. And what a way I'm trying, to be honest with you, I'm trying. Because to radio, whatever, I'm inching my way. We need to have a few big people turn over. We need that. We need a porn star, and we need a Larry King or Howard Stern, and we need somebody like that to turn over and start saying, yeah, this is the way. And we have to keep working on that. We do. We have to keep going after them and going out. And like you said about the Nightline, like that kind of, we need to keep, opening those channels. If we get a few big ones to turn over, and I think we're gonna have it actually, but just to keep working on it. I mean, it would help. And we have to, naturally, this is for the rank and file and all that, but we need a few biggies. Could be. I just saw on TV Ireland supermodel. Yeah, wasn't she like kind of almost like semi-porn or whatever? She was wasn't she? Didn't she do kind of a lot of swimsuit model? Yeah, but now she's doing a lot of moral stuff now. I forget what I was watching. Yeah, she was on with Fox News with Father Jonathan Morris. They were talking about some things, and she was there with him. So I don't know if she. Well, the swimsuit thing to me is like soft porn, basically, and objectifying women and all that, So, I mean, I don't know against modeling, but I think that the swimsuit thing is that Sports Illustrated swimsuit thing? That's just that's soft porn.
Well, and the latest issues, at least in the last few years, they've gone to like part of the issue would be bathing suits, like actual bathing suits, and then part of it is painted on bathing suits. So they're not actually wearing anything.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just paint. And so, you talk about it being porn.
Yeah, well, it is,
We'll just keep progressing. So
Yeah.
eventually it's like, well, here you go.
In this, finally, the document says that yes, nothing virtuous is easy. So it says that with staying close to the sacraments, the age-old remedies, stay close to the sacraments, counseling, spiritual direction, prayer, your Eucharistic adoration, your fasting, asceticism, the whole lifestyle, your eating habits, your sleeping habits. It's a holistic thing. That with that, it can be done, and it can be done by everybody, and it can be done well, and it would save the world. It would turn the world around. Because I believe that this is the thing that has everything rises and falls on contraception, I think. Because it's a worldview. It's a worldview. And the most heinous things that we know, the most heinous, if you think about it, the most heinous acts, the most violent time in history was the last century. And it was in the middle of the last century, in the 1930s, when we started to shift towards contraception. And the more we got there, the more heinous were the crimes against humanity. We went into Holocaust and fascism, Nazism, communism, and abortion, materialism, now, gay, so-called gay marriage. All these things that have to do with an absolutely debasing attitude, view of the body, the person, of the created order. And it just is whatever you want to do with it. whether it's your body or the environment or food, whatever. You just do whatever you want to do to anything. It has no value. And that is the mentality that was basically given a spiked 500 years ago. And we've been living in that mentality. And that's what John Paul II was trying to answer. And the hinge pin of it all, if you want to, like, it all funnels down into this issue of contraception. Just think about, like you were saying, if whatever you do in the womb, the womb is the tabernacle, the sanctuary. It's the arena for the battle of the soul of humanity. Once we started to get artificial in there, we got artificial everywhere. That's where we really went into this whole artificial existence. Artificial turf, artificial, like you say, light beer, decaf coffee, artificial foods, artificial coloring, artificial everything.
Everybody wants everything right now. They don't want it anymore.
Yeah. And once you do it there, you can do it everywhere, anywhere.
They say that the womb is the most dangerous place for a child to be today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Imagine
as
the sanctuary.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah. I had a little boy in confession. Partway through the confession, he reaches into his pocket. He pulls out he goes, "Hold on a second, Father." He answers his cell phone. Yeah, and listen, I'm in church right now. I'll call you back.
That was good.
I said, "What was that?" Says, you can't use this. Is that a cell phone? You can't use a cell phone in confession. That's the world we're in. Steiner pulls out this thing. I said, "What is?" I couldn't believe it. I said, "What is that?" That's my cell phone. It's my buddy. I said, "You can't use that in confession." It's okay. I'll call him back. Where was I? Oh.
Isn't that funny though, Father? It almost connects with, the whole contraception thing is
Yeah.
available all the time.
Yeah. Exactly. Precisely. Yeah.
And you're interrupting all the time.
Nothing
Yeah.
should,
And so you're not really doing, just like when cell phones go off in church, it drives me nuts. Not so much they go off, but the people answer them, run out of church.
Yeah.
You should impound them. Like in the Old West, where you left your guns outside the saloon, then you walked in, you have a cell phone collection, before you then pick them up when you're done, Because it means, again, it's contraceptive worship. You're with God, but you're not really with God. God can be interrupted, It's like the cell phone becomes the condom that you put on halfway through it,
Well, and like Facebook and MySpace, and all that, that's where like contraceptive interacting.
Yeah,
with people,
yeah.
not really.
Yeah, look at the whole there's this whole cyberspace world now. You actually can invent yourself and all this thing, Yeah.
On the cell phone. I have to say, God, please disconnect me from all these people's cell phones, because
Yeah.
my ears start hurting.
Yeah. That's why this contraception. My main point would be that it's a whole worldview which comes to its fullness, its most acute experience in the relationship of man and woman, husband and wife. But it's not just about that. It emanates out from that, and it's informed by a contraceptive world, and the world is informed by it in a contraceptive way.
Not really doing what we're doing.
Yeah, not doing something, but not really doing it.
Ajay quote Ajay, do what you're doing. We always talk
Yeah.
about that. Put your whole mind and
Right.
soul and
Yeah.
body into what you're
It's true. It's true.
Ajay quote Ajay, yeah.
Presence to the moment, that's what saints talk about. Saint Teresa, the little way. It's like whatever you're doing, truly do it. Be honest to what it is. Don't sort of do it.
And it's like there's people that talked about, when interacting with somebody like John Paul or like
Yeah.
Mother Teresa, it's like when they looked at you, you got this sense that like you were the only person in
That's
the
right.
room.
It's true.
It's like because they were able to be fully present to a person
Yeah.
in a way that most of us
Exactly.
haven't figured out.
Exactly. We contracept socially even, We don't mean to. It's just how we. So you see, when you should go home, your homework is to make a list of all the ways we contracept. It's amazing. Yeah, whole existence, contraception. Well, again, the economy, credit cards, that's contraceptive buying. You're buying something, owning something, but not really owning something. You're yeah. Yeah. Our homes are cars. They're ours, but they're not ours, Really. Contraceptive child raising, We have kids, but it's like, I call it trophyism. You have kids, but what's the interaction with them, really, Parenting, but not really parenting, Well, living together. Being married, not really being married,
That's why I say make an honest woman.
Yeah.
Know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
honest
Honest woman. Yeah.
when say like they're living together and then the guy marries the girl, she said he's gonna make an honest woman out of you. That's the terminology.
Pastors, we love it when families practice natural family planning. Not only do we have bigger parishes, but they are the most generous people. They will give what they do not have in terms of money to the parish, support, their time. They're very giving because they're practicing a spirituality of giving in the bedroom. That unconditional, that sense of giftedness. And it's amazing how that carries out. It's like once you're free enough, like who was said about standing on the edge, jumping over? Yeah, someone on the internet. Yeah, once you're free there in the bedroom, freedom free in the spirit, which is this whole message, freedom of the spirit. You're free in everything. In terms of your generosity, you don't have that sense of it's mine, stinginess and that. So we haven't exhausted this by any means, but at least we got the main thing is that the church, as we saw clearly, knows that this is challenging because of concupiscence, our fallen nature. But that fallen nature is overcome, the redemption of the body by our belief in Christ and staying close to Christ through the church, and it can be done. And the church understands fully that it's challenging. I think that's where most people have a divergence with the church. They get mad at the church, they resent the church because it's asking something of them that's going to take discipline and asceticism. And so they resent them for that, as if the church doesn't understand that. The church fully understands. That's why it's there for you. Yes?
Something that makes sense when you're talking about celibacy, as a state of life that demands ascesis and discipline. And they say, well, how can someone who's celibate talk to me about marriage? But what it is someone who's living a life of self-discipline and self-control, talking, encouraging other people to also live a life of asceticism and self-control, just in a different way.
It's exactly right. And marriage is what? It's our participation in the way that God loves. It's about God. And so celibate should know something about God. Therefore, they know something about marriage. Besides, if you want to be smart-aleckly with me, I'll tell you this then. 50% of marriages fail, right? You can have all the sex you want, right? Get married, have sex, you're all experts, right? Why do 50% fail? If married people knew so much about marriage, how come 50% fail? If you drove your car out of the driveway, and every other time you did, you smashed into somebody, wouldn't you conclude you don't know how to drive? Okay. So, and as you say, the celibates live by the same principles as married people. It's all about, it's two sides of the exact same coin. And what is that coin? Living spousally, living the life of gift, which is dying to self, giving of self, and receiving, whether you're celibate or married. And when marriage goes wrong, it's because the couples aren't living celibate enough. When celibacy goes wrong, The celibate is not living spousally enough. And when I say celibate married people, I meant the discipline. I'm not saying they don't have a relation.
Chastity as opposed to
Chastity is another way of saying it, yeah. They're not living a sexuality that has an understanding of the meaning of the sacrament meaning and the necessary asceticism to it, which is what celibates do. That's actually being celibate. See, celibacy exists in marriage. People, they have to realize they're not opposed to each other. One subsists in the other. A married couple, to be successfully married, must have elements of celibacy in their marriage. Otherwise, they will not have a good marriage. A celibate must live that celibacy spousally, otherwise they will not have a happy celibacy. And this is precisely why we got into trouble with the so-called clergy sex scandal. We forgot that it's all about living spousally. Celibacy wasn't the problem. Like I say, the most prophetic statement made on the clergy sex scandal was by the comedian Jay Leno. Yeah, he meant it as a joke, but I thought it was totally prophetic. He said, "Hey, did you hear that Catholic Church is going to do away with celibacy for priests because of the sex scandal? Do away with it. Well, they try it first, see if it works." Wasn't that good? I thought to myself, he nailed it. He has no idea, but he nailed it. That is the best thing I heard. Because that precisely was the problem. Why don't we try it? Why don't we understand what it is? Rediscover its spousal dimension and live that way. Then wouldn't have had those problems. And understanding the spousal dimension would mean that the particular candidate for priesthood, we should have insisted on a man who is fully, even though it's a contradictory word, heterosexual. That's right. I know it's a whole other subject. But there's a book called Asceticism. Let's see. Asceticism, Prayer, Sex, and Deviant Priests. I think it's kind of a long title, but those are sort of the words. It's by the Linacher Institute. It's a definitive book, deep, detailed study and proof. Really, it's a support of the survey started by the Catholic bishops that proved that the clergy sex scandal was basically a homosexual phenomenon. It was not pedophilia. 80% of it was. It's actually the correct word is pederast. Pederasty. Pederasty means teenage and up. Why? Because in 1961, the subject came up to Pope John the 23rd. Can a man who has sexual attraction tendencies, can he be a suitable candidate for the priesthood? The Pope said no. And in that way, he was being very theology of the body. Well, we hedged on that. And we started to take a less Catholic, less integrated view of the whole concept of sexuality. And we started in very non-Catholic way to compartmentalize what that meant. And we started to say, well, if a man has an attraction to the same gender, as long as he's not acting it out, he can be a suitable candidate for the priesthood. In other words, we reduced the whole thing to genitalia. And that was the mistake. Because it's much, much more than that. As a result, when we deviated from the sacramental view of sexuality, we got burnt. That's what happened.
Father, one thing that I was thinking of, because, I mean, I think I've experienced it myself in situations, when you are not living in truth, your vision, I would say, your holy vision, because we have our interior and exterior, it does become camouflage so that you're not looking at reality, and that's why
Right.
people are no longer an accusation, that are based on truth.
Right. Right. Everything is your interior worldview. It's called ethos. The ethos. Everything's about. That's why his whole section was Christ appeals to the heart. It's all about. It's not the external. It's the heart. What's in the heart that then affects what's outside. Yes.
Well, and like you talked about priesthood and celibate priesthood being reduced to the like genitalia, that makes that that to me would explain why suddenly women wanted to be priests. They said, well,
Yes.
if it's simply a matter of your physical biology, that seems kind of arbitrary. Like
Right.
why can't I be a priest as well?
Exactly.
It was a question of like that.
Right. When we resume in August, I'm going to resume in August. I think maybe that's the direction we should go in. Do you think? That's usually what I do. Is I apply it to the issues. Take all that we've done this past year and apply it to the issues like this, because that's all these questions, all these issues are big, take a lot of explanation, because there's a whole another reasons why they started asking for women priests, and it has to do basically with when we lost sight of the theology of the body. And
I mean, I remember in like the 80s, it was so, we were not supposed to call ourselves brides of Christ.
yeah.
I mean, that was so,
Yeah.
not within our convent, but remember that? It's like really poo-poo, like if other nuns who were into some kind of radical feminism, and just the whole church in general, was like
Yeah.
priests and everything was like, you do not
Can you
do
imagine?
that.
You
Like,
actually.
you're not the bride of Christ. And
It's always been that you are the person.
Yeah.
as we all are, the whole church is the bride
Yeah.
of Christ.
But in particular.
Us more,
And what happened when you were told not to look how you lost? Everybody left. Everybody got in trouble. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's under the ground.
We had one sister who hated that image, and she was like, I was reading this like really goofy love poetry to Jesus out loud. She was like, ew, stop. Well, she left the convent. 'Cause I remember thinking, what is she saying? And I'm thinking to myself, what is her life based on?
Yeah,
Her life
exactly.
is her spousal relationship.
Right, it's true.
And it was like, well, it wasn't for her. She left and got married. It was, anyway.
Exactly, yeah. Thinking that they would find that intimacy there. That's it. That's the only way you can find that intimacy is in physical marriage. So, again, the answer is in this spousal, like that's why he says it's the fundamental element of human existence. It's the spousal mystery. And the rediscovery of that, especially in religious life, in priesthood, is what will turn everything around. And this is not the whole thing. I hope we should get into it, but I'll leave you hanging on it. But and you can read. That's why I insisted that the sisters get that book down there called "Spirit of the Liturgy" by Cardinal Ratzinger. When you had the cry for women priests, that occurred when you turned the altar around. Believe it or not, turning the altar around, the priest facing the people during the whole Mass, was not what was intended by Vatican II. And there was never a history of that in the Church. And when you did, and therefore the whole, your churches got all rearranged. You redesigned your whole inside of your churches. What happened was, you lost what was inherently in the Mass. The Mass inherently carried with it the spousal imagery. There was the whole imagery of Christ, the bridegroom from on high, being embodied, imaged by the male priest who comes to his bride, people. And you lost that. So that's when they say, well, gee, what does it matter who's up there, male or female? So you lost the whole sign value. And that's one of the reasons why the Pope has allowed, the motu proprio has allowed the people to do the Mass, the Latin Mass, or the Mass ad orientem. In other words, the idea was everybody faced east, even the priests. So the churches were laid out basically east and west. So everybody was facing the altar, facing, the church, back in the church, and or front of the church. And the way Mass goes, the way the Eucharist, both East and West, is we all face, like the virgins, waiting for, the wise virgins waiting for the bridegroom to come. We all face waiting for him to come from on high and to unite himself with his body. Liturgy is a great conjugal experience, mystically. And if you notice, during the Mass, in the old days, the priest would turn around to face the people, but only when he was bringing something to the people of the highest nature. In other words, to speak mystically, when he was coming to inseminate the bride, to plant the Word of God or the Eucharist. You had that sense that when he turned around, something very special was happening, coming from on high.
With the sign of peace, he turned into.
Sign of peace, God's blessing. Remember, when a priest blesses, it's not he who's blessing. He's communicating the blessing of Christ, which is why you should be saying, like when the priest says, and with your peace be with you, you should say, and with your spirit, not and with you. Good, good. Now, think of how huge that is. That is monumental. Because in the one, what you're doing is, you're simply greeting each other like a regular greeting to that person. It's remaining level of us. There's no God there. In the correct one, and with your spirit, what you're doing is, you're acknowledging the Holy Spirit that is within that man's priesthood and his soul. So you're really acknowledging God. See that? Those are two fundamentally different worldviews of how to approach liturgy, Eucharist. One, it's about you and I, just like we can be at a Cubs game. The other one, it's God. It's God who we are addressing. God who is speaking to us, God who we are addressing, in the person of the priest, in the person of the bride. Huge difference. Now that orients your whole attitude to liturgy, to Eucharist, which then orients your whole attitude to life, the bedroom, the environment, the economy. You see how important this is? That's why this Pope, he says it. When you're worshiping correctly, everything else goes correct. If you mess up worship, you mess everything else up. And that's what happened. All this stuff went simultaneously. Turn the altar, contraception, divorce, no vocations. Notice how it all happened at the same time? Why? What's the thing that holds them together? The spousal mystery. And we unraveled that. The knot was right here. The knot that held it together was in the altar. Now you tamper with the knot, you unleash the whole rope.
So it's better to pray. I pray for my neighbors every day. I mean, I do it all the time. But maybe it's transformation of, one dimension of body, mind, spirit, in God.
Mm-hmm.
Worship in God. And, because I'm always praying for their health, and there's something always happening to them. And so I feel really guilty. Oh my goodness, what am I, doing? I said this, because I'm very mindful of what I say, because what you say is what you preach
Yeah.
and carry with you.
Yeah, it is. The way we pray tells you what we believe. See? Exactly. Well, the way we pray. You want to understand what we believe, who we are, then take apart our worship. Take it apart, look at it, and see. That's the glimpse into our soul. So if there's something wrong with worship, there's something wrong with our soul.
Is there a good book on how to be better worshipers?
The first one I would say is Spirit of the Liturgy. Ratzinger. It's downstairs. I'm the single biggest proponent of
I'll
it.
wait till you have it.
Is Ratzinger now encouraging the changing of the Mass, or are we going to be turning the altar back around because of his beliefs now?
Well, he's allowing, if you want to do, it's called ad orientem, means to the east. He's allowing, if you can do the same, your Mass, but the priest can do it by standing on the other side of the altar. In other words, facing the back of the sanctuary. And, he turns around at the appropriate time. So he is allowing that, encouraging that. He hasn't said, turn that altar back around. He hasn't said that. I wish he would. Really, for your sake, for the sake of the whole church, because that's your true church. You have to understand. I know this whole generation brought up, but you have to understand this is very important. Your true church is not in the way it got turned around. And you know where you find that out for proof is in the documents of Vatican II that people have used to justify turning the altar around. It doesn't say that in there. And I wish he would just say, that's it. But I think he knows I just think he's moving slowly and realizing that he can't do it all at once because it's so entrenched right now. And you've brought up a couple generations in it already, that, yes.
Do you think that I've noticed one thing he's been doing lately, because it seems like papal liturgy, or at least it's supposed to kind of set the standard for other priests. He puts the crucifix in like the middle of the altar, so that, when he's offering the sacrifice, it's to Christ on the cross,
Right.
not, to the people.
Right.
Is that sort of trying to reorient
Yes,
people?
he is. And
maybe
he's
eventually turn back around? Or?
Yes, he is. That's what he's doing. And he also noticed he puts candles across the front. I think they're doing that at AWTN in the Mass there. They're putting candles, I noticed that, in front, across the front of the altar. I know Mitch Pacwa does it, Father Mitch. I saw some Masses. Yeah, they do that? Yeah. You should try. You should encourage your priests to do it. It's called ad orientem. In other words, I'm not saying you have to. Neither is the Pope saying everybody has to go back to the Latin Mass. We're not supposed to do that. And he doesn't want to do that either. He allows it, but see, the Latin Mass needed some work too. See, again, the good old days weren't totally good old days.
Did you understand? I don't know. I didn't study Latin.
See, what you were supposed to do, the way it was supposed to go was this. You weren't supposed to turn it around. You were supposed to still use Latin and Gregorian chant, but you could use music and language of your culture. Of your culture, not someone else's culture, your culture.
But that doesn't mean tossing the props away either.
No, no. In other words, if you had music, let's say, people in whatever culture had indigenous music that they used for worship, and if they were pagan, whatever their indigenous music was and their language, that could now be used. You could use it. You didn't have to. If you didn't want to, it was perfectly all right to keep using Latin and Gregorian chant. That is what Vatican II actually says. So it gave you an option. It allowed an openness by the church, but it was not intended to fundamentally change things like that. And so you could have it's called Novus Ordo Mass for you. You can have that Mass and still do it facing the east, facing the altar. Your music should be reverent. Now, America, there's a question of, do we have indigenous worship music in America?
Sure, guitar mass.
Huh?
How about like Christian music? I mean, we're not, that say Christ.
Well, it's interesting, Christian music, because it's like, okay, what is Christian music? Christian music basically is Protestant-based. Now, do we consider that to be indigenous religious music in our culture or not? I don't know. Is it for Catholics?
Does it say God, God in Christ and love?
Maybe we don't. Maybe we should be using Latin.
Just Latin.
Or not Latin, sorry, Gregorian chant, but English. Maybe. I'm just proposing, just taking what it actually says, like you weren't, it didn't say that, okay, in America you're supposed to sing Kumbaya. In Africa, yeah, that was your, worship music, fine. I'm just telling you what the church said. And it's right there in paperback. You have it downstairs, right? It's just in paperback. You wonder what happened,
I think, have you been to St. John Cantius?
Haven't been there, but I know about it very well.
They offer, the new Mass, but I think, like, at least to me, what seems to be, like, according to the vision of the council, said, they retain, like, Gregorian chant and the vestments and,
yes.
Facing east,
Mhm.
it's the new Mass, with,
See, that's what was supposed to be, actually. That's really what Vatican II meant. But again, it gave you the freedom to use other music as long as it was reverent music. If there was in Mexico or whatever country, if they had an indigenous music that was for worship, then okay, you could use that. You could use it. You didn't have to, but you could. See, before you couldn't. See, the reason they did that was that when the church went into other countries to evangelize, they came in like they went to China, said, okay, okay, you're gonna pray in Latin and use Gregorian chant. Well, that was totally foreign to those people, and so there was trouble in evangelizing them, and then sometimes they rejected it. So what they did was they did actually what was happening, what the East has done since the 9th century, is they said, okay, use their language and use their music, as long as it's reverent. Thank you. No, it's okay. We're way past time anyway. And you could also teach them Gregorian chant in Latin. That's what it said. That's what Vatican II meant. It meant stop imposing like one way on them. Respect their culture.
Father, the only thing that I have is because I work with so many people from like all over the world, people from India.
Mm-hmm.
And, they have the music in the background and they have and so you say God and there's always a mindset, and you're working with so many cultures.
Yeah.
In a room and value systems, and they're very good people, and so it's my thing is, how do I know when I leave or when they leave and there's probably they're concerned, am I still Catholic or they're still Indian, because there's so much, and I think there's a battle, so I view them as friends, and what happens when you work with so many people that don't believe in what you believe?
Well,
and I've been, in the corporate setting where I've worn my, my Sacred Heart of Jesus, and they have like looked at me and said, and like out loud, and I'm like, my God, that is an offensive thing to say.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you don't yield to that. You have to challenge that a bit. Because you can say to them, well, where do we stop with things? What if I don't like the color? What if the color red offends me? You're wearing red. Should you now take off that blouse? That sweater. Where do we stop with this offending thing? That's another big bunk. About offending. I usually tell people if they're offended at something, I say, well, I'm offended that you're offended. Now what do we do? Now what do we do? The answer is, like in football, offsetting penalties. So continue on. Offending. You know what offensive is? We've learned in our culture that when truth is coming toward you, or something challenges you in any way, you pull out. It's like the race card. You pull out the I'm offended card, and it will stop that dead in its tracks. So you don't have to deal with anything you want to deal with. We realize that we all carry around this little smart bomb, or not smart bomb, a dirty bomb, like a nuclear bomb in our pocket. It's called the offensive card. If you don't want to deal with something, you just pull out the offensive card, and that person is supposed to just stop that in their tracks. And that's wrong, and that needs to be challenged. You're only offended if you choose to be. You're only offended if you choose to be. And that's what people have to be told. Simple as that. Don't be afraid. We have to stop being. There has to be some pushback to this stuff, because it's out of hand, and it contradicts itself. It's in the name of sensitivity. It's actually very tyrannical. It's very insensitive. It's a dictatorship. Yeah.
I've been confronted not once, but very negatively in my previous employer. Where I just left, and I don't care. I'm going to talk to the director.
You're going to plug into what's good, but also don't be afraid. Well, maybe I can get away with it. To be outrageous. I just prove them that they're Catholic.
I was very outrageous. My priest was very happy with it.
Good, very good. Yeah, just stay strong in it. We have to.